Russian propaganda about the Ukraine war is sometimes pretty easy to spot. It's all over social media platforms like X. But you'd think the guy who literally runs X would be able to discern a obviously fake news story. But that's not the case, as Elon Musk seems to be amplifying Russian disinformation on Ukraine. We're going to talk about just what he's saying and why it doesn't bode well for his ability to streamline the U.S. government. Plus, of course, we're going to talk about a potential peace deal in Ukraine and Ukraine's offensive in the Kursk region. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is a really, I'm going to say interesting, but that's probably being generous, is that this is a tweet from an account called I Meme, Therefore I Am, and it was a retweet of a Donald Trump Jr. post, which was in turn retweeted by none other than Elon Musk himself. And I want you guys to take a look at this story and tell me if you can just tease out
$8 million.
whether or not you think it's authentic
Ben Stiller,
or AI-generated Russian
USAID
propaganda.
sponsored American celebrity visits to Ukraine after Russia's full-scale invasion began.
Does that sound like the voice of a presenter from E! News? Right? You notice the Cryon here says this is E! News, a major celebrity news network in the United States. So why it's an AI-generated British woman is unclear.
Angelina Jolie, $20 million. Sean Penn, $5 million. Jean-Claude Van Damme, $1.5 million. Orlando Bloom, $8 million. Ben Stiller, $4 million. This was done to increase Zelensky's popularity among foreign audiences, particularly in the United States.
There it is, E! News again. You notice this quote was, well, not from anybody, right?
Made it easier to coordinate funding programs for Ukraine during the conflict.
Also, that doesn't make any sense. I don't know what that means. Makes it easier to coordinate funding programs? No, the celebrities were probably there fundraising. Now, here's the thing, guys. This was tweeted by the president's son and then retweeted by Elon Musk, who you may know as part of his Doge program is currently going line by line through USAID programs and simply deleting programs he doesn't agree with. Now, I want to be clear. USAID is an organization that definitely is in need of some reform, and particularly keeping it aligned with U.S. foreign policy priorities, right? We talked about this in an earlier video, but that doesn't mean if you think the USAID is violating the law, you don't get permission to violate the law back. It's like if you see your neighbor kick their dog, you go, well, technically he's a criminal, so I'm just going to shoot him, right? You can't do that because obviously you cannot just commit a crime to totally get back for another crime. But here's the thing. Is this even a crime? Well, readers in, again, Elon's own social media program put this. They said the video has been fabricated to appear as if it came from E! News, but there's no evidence that E! News ever reported this. And you can literally just look through E! News online. Then E! News themselves, one of their editors debunked the claim, saying this is never a story that we dropped. And Ben Stiller himself said, no, dude, my trip to Ukraine was entirely self-funded, right? There is nothing more tacky than a celebrity, of course, who is working with UNICEF, right, and UNHCR, demanding money, right? That would be a career killer for them. An EU spokesman said that Elon Musk, the video that Elon Musk amplified, retweeted, purported to show E! News saying USAID paid celebrities is, quote, this is from E! News, quote, not authentic and did not originate from E! News. So you got to ask yourself, well, why would someone need to fabricate this kind of story, right? And again, Ben Stiller himself said, no, dude, this didn't happen. Now, you could trust Ukraine, who has a pretty robust agency working to try to counter Russian disinformation, said that this actually came from a Russian source, this claim, Agentstvo, a fake video circulated and amplified by Kremlin bots from what they attributed to the Matroshenko network, right? This was a bot network from a few years ago that amplified Russian propaganda to Western audiences, right? Now, again, the clip, despite having E! News' headline, does not appear on E! News' official page. And Donald Trump Jr. added the fact that USAID might be the biggest scam ever perpetrated against the American people under the guise of doing good, right? And The agent's vote said that this clip is part of a Kremlin bot campaign targeting USAID. As part of this effort, other videos have falsely claimed that USAID funded online disinformation, lost $20 billion after losing control over biolabs in Ukraine. Yeah, surprise, USAID biolabs, surprise, and $8 to $12 billion dollars pro-Ukraine content on YouTube. And I want to point this out is that USAID's 2023 budget is $40 billion. So that would literally, you can just, simple math, something we know Elon is good at, should tell you that 20 plus 12, would mean that basically all of USAID's budget would have gone to these things. So this is just, the problem is not that there are false claims circulating. Obviously, that's not good. But the problem is that the inability of the person who is in charge of teasing out, right, whether USAID programs are valid or not, is unable to determine if simple news stories that can be verified with a Google search are valid or not, right? And this is the thing that should bother you the most, right? Now, this isn't me saying Elon Musk is a good person or bad person, right? Again, he's probably the guy you want designing your rockets. But it's sort of like if you've ever met a doctor, some of the most brilliant physicians in the world are absolutely terrible fucking investors. They are terrible athletes, and they're sometimes terrible at just like the regular shit of daily life, right? And so this is the classic example where you're really good at one thing and you decide that actually you're good at all things, right? And this is the Elon Musk problem, is that he's so sure that his worldview is the correct one that it's impossible for him to conceive of the fact that he could be wrong. And the problem is, again, when he sees stories like this and he simply says, others must know about this shocking turn of events. Well, again, this is someone who that shapes his perspective of USAID. And so that is driving determinations about, again, these kind of decision making. And I will reiterate this because it is so stinking important, right? Is that the Constitution specifies that there is one agency that decides where and who and what gets funded. And it is Congress, the elected body of the United States. They make decisions about funding. They make decisions about agencies. So Elon Musk shutting down USAID when Congress said USAID will exist. And in 2023, they funded it. Congress agreed, right? The annual budget, they funded USAID. So the Constitution makes this clear. And the fact that Elon Musk has no respect for it is probably because he is someone who was raised in a totally different country, came to this one, right, as already a multimillionaire, and just doesn't understand what it means to be an American. I don't know what to tell you. That's not to say every foreigner doesn't know what it means to be an American. I'm saying Elon Musk specifically doesn't understand literally the contours of the Constitution, or doesn't care. Right? He views the Constitution as just another set of regulations, as just another pesky thing. Like the same people that said that you have to do a study of birds before you launch your rocket into space. He's like, yeah, that's a stupid regulation. And he goes, therefore, every other government regulation all the way up to the Constitution is just a stupid burden for me to work around. And that attitude is... I can't. If you don't think that's bad in a person who apparently has gotten carte blanche to do whatever he wants in the government, I don't know what to tell you. Like if you think the Constitution is an obstacle to be an American or to the country being well run, don't get off my channel. Honestly, like if you really think that, this is not the channel for you, man. Right? We are the longest functioning democracy in the entire globe, right? We are the only economy. We have the largest economy on earth. We have the highest GDP per capita of any major nation, right? And when other nations' economies fail and falter, the US just keeps getting stronger. And the secret sauce isn't Elon Musk. It's not whoever's in the White House. It wasn't Joe Biden. It's not billionaires. It's regular Americans who just work so hard and give so much of a shit about their country. So this kind of shit where some fucking asshole tells us how our country needs to work, especially when it's some rich asshole, like, fuck off, dude. Anyway, if you're curious why I also get salty about that, is that the CIA, which, don't get me wrong, I've read the same books that you guys have, right? The CIA has done some not so great things, right? They ran the interrogation programs in Abu Ghraib. But for every bad thing the CIA had done, remember, guys, the Russian FSB and the Chinese state security apparatus, they wake up every day and think, how can I destroy this fucking country? And the CIA, remember, guys, the I stands for intelligence. And that is the fundamental thing they do, is they go out into the world and they get as much information as possible so that when America makes decisions about how we relate to China, about how we relate to Saudi Arabia, about where we can look and find, how we relate to any given country, the CIA is the eyes and ears of every decision this country makes. And so when you sit there and go, yeah, I'd be happy to see the CIA's programs get a deep audit, right? I'd be happy to see that. But that's not what happened. Instead, they just offered to bribe all CIA employees to leave. Like, let that sink in. Someone has just offered a huge buyout to all CIA employees. Remember, who is going to take a buyout? Who do you think is most likely to take a buyout from the CIA? The best people, the people who are most likely to find gainful employment elsewhere. That means that you are not just cutting the CIA's most wasteful programs or their poorest performers, you're actually cutting the best performers, right? You're going to cut the person who speaks fluent Chinese. You're going to cut the person who is a brilliant engineer. You're going to cut the people who are doing the best work, and you're going to leave the underperformers, right? And this is something that, again, anyone else, every business owner understands, right? And again, when you combine the fact that if I told you somebody was repeating known and identified Russian propaganda, and then in the same day was trying to destroy the entire CIA, offering to bribe the agents to leave, I would say that that's a bad person who wants to destroy the country. I just can't argue with it, right? And I know maybe he thinks he's destroying the country for a good reason. Maybe he has some kind of greater vision. But the fact is that Elon Musk's idea of a great country is probably not one that the rest of us want to live in. It's not clear that Elon Musk likes being Elon Musk. So again, the reason this is top of line on this video is because it should be top of line in what bothers you, what keeps you up at night, right? So anyway, before we talk about Trump's, quote, peace plan, as well as Ukraine's new offensive in Kursk, I wanted to mention, of course, two things. First off, if you do like the fact that I speak truth to power and I'm an honest broker here, not many of us left on the internet, hit that subscribe button. That makes a difference. But second, if you want to help keep me independent and able to put even powerful people on blast, which is apparently pretty dangerous business in this day and age, you can support me over on combatvetnews.com. Twice a week, I get the uncensored combat videos from the front lines of Ukraine. Literally, I still get stuff videos sent to me on Signal from the units overseas, where they send me just some absolutely crazy fucking footage of their operations. So we take a look at that. We do a deep dive analysis. It's also got an archive basically of combat footage going back to the start of the war, so you can watch it evolve from the jump. Any one of these tiers will get you access to those videos, but if you want to participate in the Q&As and get the shout outs, Lieutenant and the Colonel tier getting the absolute best by name shout outs. So check it out, combatvetnews.com. The link is in the description, and support the channel and yours truly today. Okay. Now, this is the Daily Mail. So take it with a big, hefty grain of salt. But this claims the Trump peace plan for Ukraine is leaked, including a ceasefire by Easter and an end to Zelensky's NATO ambitions. Which bothers me because Zelensky's NATO dream. Okay, it's pretty sure it's all of Ukraine's constitutionally mandated ambition, right? It's literally baked into the Ukrainian constitution that they aspire to join NATO. And NATO has said, dude, we want Ukraine to join. So, in some ways, it would be a defeat and humiliation for NATO to go, yeah, we think Ukraine's going to come, and then to have Russia go, no, they won't, and NATO goes, oh yeah, you're right. But, sometimes ending the war, maybe it's okay for its own sake. I don't know. But what is the contours of the plan? Well, the contours of the plan, they're pretty mid. It's a ceasefire by April 20th that would freeze Russia's steady advance, a permanent ban on Ukraine from joining NATO, and a demand for Kiev to accept Russian sovereignty on its annexed land, right? It's not clear what Ukraine is going to get out of this. Ukrainian troops will be made to leave the Kursk region, so the only people withdrawing are going to be Ukrainian troops. Right? And a contingent of European soldiers, including British troops, would be asked to police a demilitarized zone between the Russians and the Ukrainians. American troops will not be involved in the contingent. The EU will be asked to assist Ukraine in its reconstruction efforts, which may cost as much as $486 billion over the next decade. Right? Reportedly, ceasefire plans will begin with a formal phone call between Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, in a meeting between the two leaders in late February to early March, an official ceasefire by April 20th, where then negotiations will begin. Now, Trump wants to set up an international peace conference mediated by other nations to help forge an agreement that will end the war. And this is, here's the question you got to ask yourself. So Russia invades Ukraine. What exactly price did they pay? The answer is, other than in lives, again, the only people who are withdrawing are Ukrainians. And most importantly, though, this amounts to a defeat for NATO, and it amounts to a defeat for Ukraine. It's not clear. Again, you have to think like Putin. Even if European and UK soldiers patrol a demilitarized zone, Putin has shown a willingness to invade from other directions. But more importantly, Putin believes that he is willing to engage in subterfuge, right? Look, and influence campaigns. There is no neutral country. Can you name another neutral country in Eastern Europe, right? One that isn't in the Russian sphere of influence, but also isn't in the NATO and EU sphere of influence? No, you can't, right? So why Ukraine? The chances of Russia engaging in a intelligence-driven coup is significant. And if you combine that with the fact that, Russia's going to say, okay, well, we've dealt all this damage to Ukraine militarily. We couldn't take them over with our military. Maybe we can install another puppet government, much like we ended up tried to do in Moldova. And the problem is that you might recall that the best people to fight and help counter the FSB would likely be the American CIA. But as we just talked about, we're trying to bribe all the CIA officers to leave. So then you're stuck with this problem of Russia's going to take this as de facto permission to install, again, a pro-Russian government in Kiev. And what's going to happen? Here's the other thing. Remember, there was a peace deal signed with the Taliban, but as soon as the U.S. withdrew, the Taliban put that thing in the fucking shredder. And the reason is because if there's no one to oppose you, if you believe you have won, then no one can stop you from violating a treaty. So what would happen if Russia were to just reinvade Ukraine from the north? What would happen? Because remember, Kiev is banned from mobilizing troops as part of this, right? And so this whole problem, right, is tremendously, it just gets worse and worse for Ukraine. There's nothing stopping Russia from just relaunching an invasion and taking over the rest of the country. So, especially given the fact that a lot of these peace deals involve a election by Ukraine holding a snap election. So we'll see. We'll see if this actually plays out, if Ukraine's willing to stomach this deal, in which basically only Russia gets anything out of it. And again, it's not clear that this significant coercion even really is working on Putin. If Putin feels like he's in a position of strength, because again, he's going to get almost everything he wants. And remember, the U.S. is only one of the tangential parties in this conflict, right? Ukraine has to agree to this, but also the EU. The EU has to agree to put their troops in harm's way. And if they feel like Russia's going to just turn the spigot back on, they are probably not going to accept it, right? Again, it's not clear that even European troops would be willing to pull the trigger. You might recall that almost every time EU or European peacekeepers have gone to intervene somewhere, basically they have sat and watched as crimes are committed. In fact, almost everywhere UN peacekeepers are deployed, you see just a comical level of ineffectiveness. So I wouldn't hold my breath that this is going to be the peace deal. And there's still a lot of holes. And I think it's going to be interpreted by Putin as NATO capitulation. And he'll be kind of right. Again, NATO's made a lot of statements that Ukraine and NATO membership, Ukraine on the path to NATO membership. Again, Russia will high-five itself claiming to have defeated NATO, and they'll be right. Now, Ukraine, in order to improve its negotiating position, Russia claims they're launching an offensive in Kursk. This seems like a really bad idea. Again, a few Russian military bloggers said Ukrainian forces allegedly attacked southeast of Suza, advancing towards some of these towns here. Again, deployed up to 2 mechanized battalions for the offensive. But again, I think that the offensive is probably not going to happen. I don't know what else to tell you. Generally, this is probably not an offensive. This is probably a localized attack at most. But Ukraine, if they're smart, they're going to be conserving their personnel and conserving their fighting power. Given the fact that they are currently redeploying up to 50,000 troops to kind of create a rotational system in their ground forces to really allow them to rest and refit. But it's not clear that strategy is, it's not clear that this is aligned with that strategy, right? Because you can't go on offense, burn more of your personnel, even as you're trying to backfill and give your personnel a break. Okay. Now, let's talk about gas. EU and Moldova. Remember, so you might recall that Russia has another non-state state, right? A breakaway region called Transnistria that it controls in Moldova. And Moldova, the Moldovan government has said, listen, no, right? But the problem is the Transnistrian area has a lot of power generation, right? And so they provide a lot of power to the Moldovans. And so because Ukrainian gas because Russian gas no longer transits through Ukraine, that ended the start of this year. Russia has said, well, we're not going to allow Transnistria to make power from Moldova. Moldova goes, shoot, we already have a cost of living crisis. A huge spike in the price of energy is going to really put the screws to the Moldovan population. And we have to do better than that. And so the EU has stepped in and they said, listen, we're going to bail you guys out, right? We are going to wean Moldova off its dependence on Russian supplies and integrate it into the EU's network, right? So this is a classic example of sort of Putinist takeovers trying to backfire, right? Putin trying to punish the Moldovans for not aligning with Russian interests, and the EU stepping in and saying, hey, well, we can actually try to bring Moldova, we can deliver them cheaper, better electricity to be free from Russian state-owned oil giant Gazprom. So this is, again, a classic sort of Cold War sort of play, right? Where you have a Russian-aligned region and you have an EU-aligned region. And the goal is to make the EU-aligned region as wealthy and prosperous and free as possible. That's the offer, right? And it's a really good offer, right? Again, when the Berlin Wall fell, where did people go? Did anyone from the West flee to the East, desperate for their price controls and Soviet-style block housing? Or did almost all traffic flow from East Berlin to the West? Well, it's pretty obvious. And this is sort of the intent. This is why so many countries clamor to join the EU-NATO bloc, because they open their eyes. They're like, listen, walk around the streets of Paris or Krakow. You're just like, dude, this is a prosperous, thriving place. And then you walk along the streets of somewhere like Belarus, right? And you're going to go, dude, this place is a shithole. And like, that's it. That's the whole argument, right? There's no amount of Russian propaganda, anti-Western bullshit, all this fucking hemming and hawing that argues with, do you want your family to grow up like begging to heat their home, hoping that this year you'll be able to heat your home all winter? Or do you want them to grow up going like, I don't know if my kid's old enough to have an iPhone. Like, is she old enough for an iPhone? Dude, it's a no fucking brainer. It's a no brainer. And that's the goal. That is where the U.S. does its best. And I want to point this out here. Here's a power station in Moldova, right? A USAID supported project. And again, this is sort of part of it. That when we talk about the U.S. influence, there's good things, right? The U.S. government's saying, listen, we're going to make Moldova a place that everyone wants to go. Why? Because Moldova is our friend. And every time somebody says, hey, every time somebody drives by that power station and goes, man, I remember when I grew up, 15 years ago, you couldn't heat your home all winter. Now, there's this big new power plant and our home stays warm around the year. And every time you drive by it, in big fucking letters, it says USAID. Now, that doesn't mean every USAID program is good. That doesn't even mean that I think the majority are good. But when you do shit like that, that's what we talk about when we say countering Russian influence, where literally the Russians are out there trying to use electricity to carve out piece of Moldova, to blackmail Moldova into becoming a Russian satellite state. And the U.S. government says, no. You want to play stupid games? We'll play stupid games. We'll build them the nicest power plant you've ever fucking seen. And you know what? That's a good use of my tax dollars. Why? Because here's the thing. If the Moldovan government joins the EU and they join NATO and they join other free trade blocs, that means the U.S. gets a trading partner, a very valuable one. And as we saw with Poland, right, in the 20 years after adopting this kind of West-facing viewpoint, their economy grows. They become a bigger and bigger trading partner of the U.S., right? Now, today, Poland does something like 4 to 8 times the trade volume with the United States that they did in 2000. So these are the kind of wins. They're investments. Right? It's like this. Imagine you live in a neighborhood and the neighborhood is kind of on the edge, right? Some of the houses are in disrepair. Your neighbor's an old lady. She has this window. It's boarded up. And every time people drive by, it looks like the house is abandoned. And you go, you know what? Listen, I'm going to go in. I'm going to fix your window, Mrs. Smith. I'm going to pay for it. We'll put in new glass. I got a contractor. He's a great guy. He'll fix it up. And she goes, well, what do you want for it? He goes, don't worry about it. I just want to make the neighborhood look nice. So you go and you fix the window. You fix maybe your other neighbor's got a tree down. You cut it up, you haul it off. You go, hey man, your yard's looking a lot better. They go, what do I owe you for it? Don't worry about it. Well, what happens? Well, then you see property values in everybody's neighborhood go up. Everybody's, including your property. So suddenly you go, oh man, I spent $300 on a window and now my house is worth $30,000 more. Sounds like a good investment. That's the power of development, right? Again, if it works on your street, it can work in your globe. Again, please understand, this is not me being a USAID is all good and never does anything wrong. Trust me. I don't want there's a lot the USAID does that I think should be rolled back. But Elon Musk, Mr. Russian propaganda, should not be the one making those decisions. Now, there's been one other conversation. There's one other way that Ukraine thinks it can coerce the Russian government into a peace deal, and that is nuclear weapons. And this is one of the biggest problems. Ukraine regaining nuclear weapons, Keith Kellogg says, is not going to happen. But, right, the chance of them getting their nuclear weapons back is somewhere between slim and none. Let's be honest, it's not going to happen, right? Though Zelensky has suggested that if Ukraine's NATO ascension remains blocked, the U.S. may provide an alternative guarantee, including nuclear weapons, right? The president said, we're a government of common sense. When someone suggests that, consider the outcome or potential, use your common sense. Right? Zelensky said NATO membership could take years or decades and raised concerns about how Ukraine can defend itself in the meantime. And what's also interesting, and this is another good takeaway here, that if you hear Russian propaganda about Ukraine was about to join NATO, that's why the war started. Note the countries who are opposed to Ukraine's NATO membership: the United States, Germany, Hungary, and Slovakia. Huh. That's kind of weird. I thought they said that Ukraine's NATO membership was a crash course for Putin. Was the absolute red line. But it's weird that the US actually wouldn't let Ukraine join NATO, and that when asked about it, Vladimir Putin himself told Tucker Carlson, NATO has nothing to do with this. This is about Russia's historic claims on the Ukrainian state. So this is just, again, this is the work, man. This is the work of diplomacy. And it doesn't feel good. You don't always have to love it, but you gotta accept it. That the real business is messy and it's complicated and it's multifaceted. And like, it's just like this. If you don't want, let's say, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. Let's say you had a really complex medical problem. And you see a doctor, you're like, man, how often does this happen, right? You have a bunch of really complex medical problems. Maybe a loved one does. And you go to a doctor and they dismiss them and they give you a very simple diagnosis. And you go, well, I know it's not that, dude. I know it's not thing X, okay? That's very simple. A simple medication. This is more complicated. And the doctor goes, no, just do X. Just take X. And you take it and you don't get better. And then you go back and you're like, dude, I think it's more complicated. And the doctor goes, no, it's not. It's not more complicated. Here, just try Y. Same diagnosis, different medication, try Y. Well, at some point, you're going to go, no, dude, I want you to treat this problem as complicated, as dynamic, as having to, maybe you need a team of specialists. Maybe you need several medications working together. Maybe we need to do more tests. There's you have to treat complex problems like complex problems. If you treat complex problems like simple problems, you're going to make them worse, or you're going to create new, worse problems. So you have to treat surgery like surgery. There's a reason there's 50 fucking dudes in a surgical center. Dudes, that's unfair. People. But there's 50 of them to do one surgery, right? It's because it's complicated. And you have to treat complicated things as complicated. And international relations, right? The management of the largest government in the entire United States, right? A country with relationships with 250 other countries in the globe. It has to be treated seriously. And it has to be done in ways that align with our democracy. Anyway, that's all I had, guys. Hit that subscribe button. Check us out on Combat Fit News. Thanks to James Sterling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Lutz, and Bastian Himling, Brian Kelly, Del McCombs, James Olma, Henry Roos here, all of our Lieutenant tier members. I could not appreciate you guys more. You really do. You have to understand how freeing it is to know that you guys have my back. And I appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.